Koinei te wāhanga timata mo tō tātou huarahi. So this is the beginning of our day, and we, from Ngāti Whātua Rākei, the customary thing is to convene the dimensions, all of them, the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. So first off, if we could all please stand. Me tū tātou. Nō reira, kia inoi tātou. E ngā tua Māori, anō te puno o te oranga te puno o ngā hua mākurukuri ki te wairua. Ko koutou rā te mātā puno te mātauranga ara. Ko koutou rā hoki te oroko hanganga o tō tātou nei ao kiko kiko. Nō reira, he tika kia tuku ngā kloria ki a koe. Kia koutou e te tokotoru tapu i tēnei rā. Kia tatu mai anō koutou ki wāinga nui ki tēnei whakamoimiti o mātou. Hei tātari ngā kupu katoa e whakapūkina nei mātou i roto i tō koutou kororitanga. Ko koutou nei hoki te timatanga me te whakaotinga mai a mātou e tūmanako atu nei i roto i tō koutou kororitanga. Kia tau o manaakitanga i rungi a mātou, ho mai ki a mātou te waroha nui. Kia taki mai koutou i a mātou i tēnei ata. Hei te whitinga mai o te rāhu. Kororia i tō koutou ingoa tapu. Ake, ake, ake. Āmene. Whiti ora, ki te whaia, ki te amarama. Whiti ki runga, whiti ki ro. E ngungu ki te kōhatu, e ngungu ki te rākau. E ngungu ki te wai, e ngungu ki te hau. Titaha ki tēnei taha, titaha ki tēnā taha. Ti he mauri o. Ka tu au i te kei o tōku waka ko māhuhu ki te rangi. Waikare tū te moana o kaipara. I hakatau ki ai, kōrero, takahuri waka, pakarere a wahi. Kia kake au ki te taumata ki puke kararo. Hei rei. Puri ai ngā hau o tāwhiri mātia. Katahuri atu rā ki ngā hiri ke tarawera. Kei o takaniri, o kukoi, e takoto mai. Kia pākuringa ki te pau whakairo kātū, ki te wai te mata. Koi ai mata ki te hi ai e te tahi. Kānu au i ngā puno ai ki te pākore. Hiko i tonu atu, ki maunga whau, ki maunga ki eki. Te nohoanga o ngā tupuna. Ka hoki nei au ki tōku kāinga. Kei o rāke. Ko te puru o tāmaki. Ko tumutumu whenua ngā whare tuku. Koi nei te ngau o te tahi o ngā kuri puru o tāmaki. E kore e ngaro i te hina pōuri e tuturu o whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tā i ki e. This is my tauparapara. And it is a genealogical map of where my people came from. Not the entire map, but in it we revere mountains and forests and oceans. People. Because if you revere something like a human, you will treat it like one. Personification is the most sustainable framework of all time. And even today, religions personify invisible things. It's not a spooky art. It is the idea of how we sustain the world around us. My ancestor, the Waitemata, we cannot harvest food from her. When will we change the game in this room? Full of people who play that game. E rere tonu ana ngā mihi e tukuna i au ki rātou oku rauti tapu. Rātou kua riro ki te ia rere o ranginu. E moke ana te moanga te whakaare. Tatahi anō ki a rātou kua riro ki te kini maherewa o papatunu. Ko whaia o ke tēra. Ko whaia mereraina tēra. Ko papatapihana tēra. O ki rā ki ngā mate katoa. E rere tonu ana ngā roimata. E heke tonu ana e pātuku tonu ana, e patu mana wā. Ko koutou, ko whakapiti atu ki te runga, o te kahurangi kā meha meha. Ko whakapiti atu ki Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki ka. Ki au te moe, kia tapu te moe, kia hu te moe. I just want to acknowledge all of our ancestors and those who have recently passed. It is customary for us to do this because without them, one, some or all of them, some of all of us might not be here today. For the privilege of sharing your glow, I acknowledge them. Without them, we would not be here. There is not even standing room if they were here in Auckland today. E te kingi Māori, kingi tu heitia, e noho ana koe i runga te papa ahurewa o tupuna o tō whaai. Pērā hoki te mihi ki tō makau ko wata whaai, me a kōrua tamariki mokopuna. Te kahui ariki, te whare ariki nui tonu, pai Māori rea ki o koutou. I just want to acknowledge one of the embodiments of Māori today, King Tuheitia. sits on the throne of his ancestors. Not a normal throne, a throne of love, of guidance, of environmental aspiration. E te whare tū mai nei tu tonu mai. Ko papatūna ko kei wahora. I whare ki hi e kōrua te kaupapa nei, no reira tēnā ko koe a tēnā ko kū. E mihi kauana ki tōku koro, ko maunga ki e tērā, e tū tonu mātou i ngā reke o tērā manu. Nāna no, e kawe ai e tātou te hunga ora, te hungatanga. I also want to acknowledge our place, our location. The house is the first testament of man's desire, woman's desire to belong. You build your house, you look after your family inside of it, you farm the ocean around it, you farm the lands around it, and you care and protect all of it. This is the core of why you are here today. Kia tātou te hunga ora, tēnā tātou. E aku nui, e aku rahi, e aku pari tangata, e aku pari karangaranga. Tēnā koutou, kia koe, e te koro matua, e whau. Nau anō te kaupapa nei whakamana. Ka mihi rā kia koe, me tō rōpū whakahaere. Pērā hoki te mihi kia koe, hoki e pipa, te hea mana o te poari, wai te mata. Kia koe hoki e ruki, nā ku anō. Te mihi kauana ki a koutou, e tai mai ana, ko tatu mai ki te tautoko tēnei koutou. Mai te raki ki te tonga, mai te uru ki te rāpiti. Nau mai, tāra mai. Whakatau mai. Welcome to all of you. Ko te aroha, morehu tōku e. My name is the Love Survivor. Ko māhuhu ki te rangi, tōku waka, my ancestral vessel is māhuhu ki te rangi. Ko maunga ki e tōku mama, my koro, my grandfather is Mount, is One Tree Hill. Ko te wai te mata tōku moana, she is my ancestral ocean. Ko Orake tōku mara, the epicenter of my universe, is up there in Orake. Ko Ngāti Whātua, nui tonu tōku iwi. My tribe is Ngāti Whātua. Ko te kao, te runatu. Ko Ngāo, Oku Hapu. And my greater family, my hapu, are te tau, te urungatu, and ngā oku. These compose Ngāti Whātua, Orake, ka mihi rā, ki a koutou. I am and have been the General Manager of Culture and Identity, and included in that is the Toki Tai Ao kaupapa, which is the environmental aspirations. What are we about? If you want to build a hotel or dig a hole, if you see a bone, come get me. It's probably my ancestor or someone's. That's what the kaitiakitanga is all about. It's not just a garden. The kaitiaki knows how to grow a business, but knows how to look after the place that's around it as well. We've proven that. Post-settlement, we turned $100 million of assets into $1 billion in 4 years. 5 now. Probably going to be $3.5 billion. And I know that attracts some people because of their economic prerogative, but that's not my prerogative. I'm not in the business of filling souls, pockets, I'm in the business of filling souls. Koe nei te mea nui. And you know it's about personification. You do it with your children. When they first come and arrive into this world, you speak to kids like they can talk back to you. That is the ultimate personification. I am known as a famous oxygen stealer in Ngāti Whātua. I hope today I have offered you some value in terms of the whare, the message that your local ancient brands want to give to you. What are we going to do about it? We're going to inspire kids. I leverage Pokemon because the human loves gamification. Hey? So we're building our own Pokemon. It's going to be ancestors coming out of the ocean, out of the land. We are in the AR/VR space to tell our stories. Why? Because Māori, who know their modalities of spirit, mentality, and physicality, they produce better health outcomes, better education outcomes, better economic outcomes, evidence-based, but we're still not being supported. Help us, please. Help us build these cool curriculums, because the second thing is tourism just took over dairy. That's a storytelling industry. I've spoken to many tourists, and They're not here for bumblebees and gumboos and cows. They're here for the environment. And we know that we've been leveraging this message without attributing Māori. And I don't shove that down your throat. I ask you, please remember, we do. After a 177-year tragedy, we are ready for prosperity. And I am the beneficiary. I'm the privileged one of that. So we're going to build it. So we're in the Goldilocks conditions. It's not too hot, not too cold. It's just right. I can say no to people now. I am not here for a handout. I'm here to give a hand. Anei mātou o Ngāti Pātoro rāke. Ka re roto ki ngā kōrero. Nō reira, e ngā iwi katoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. He aha te hau, e wawara mai. He tiu he raki, nā ia mai te putaraki. Ki uta e tikina atu e au. Te kotu ko ia te pau. Te pau whakairo katu ki wai te mata. I oku wairangi e koki. This is our national anthem. It's a 500-year-old prophecy of the conch shell that arrived on a beach. Very rare, right here in the Waitemata. And that ancestor saw a pillar in the ocean with the Waitemata with all these hands on it. 177 years ago, on September the 18th, William Hobson was invited here, and my ancestor stood on Maunga Whau on Mount Eden and said, Te Pānau, Taurarua, Te Hoko Tukiha, the Harbour Bridge, you can have it. He did not sell it, gave it away for shared mana, shared prosperity. Rātou te hunga mate, ko te turangi tiki rā. Tātou te hunga ora, āna ka nuhi a rātou mā ki a tātou. E te iwi, ngā kai mahi, ngā kai tiaki o Aotearoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Uri noi to tātou kare, tēnā tātou katoa. Watu au te rākau kōrero, te kauringi o te rangi, o Wallace, Chaplin tēnei, ka mengi rā ki a koe e kua. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koe, te ora, morohu. You should be a keynote speaker. You can steal my oxygen anytime. That was fantastic, very good, wonderful mihi whakato on behalf of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, so thank you very much for that. Come on through, and what a crowd, hundreds of people here for this conference, so a big welcome to the RMLA 25th. Just a bit of housekeeping. In the event of a fire, please make your way to the exit and assembly point if out to my right in front of the building. Now, Wi-Fi is available, and the network and password is RMLA 2017, just on the screen behind me. Please do make sure that you download the app, which is sponsored by GHD. And as we did yesterday, which worked very well, and the last conference in Nelson, there's my name there, and you can email me questions if you want questions to be asked of the keynote speakers all throughout the day. It's a very useful app, so if you find me on my phone all the time, I'm not being rude, I'm not texting Winston Peters and saying, good luck. It's actually, I'm scrolling through your questions. Well, again, here we are, the 25th RMLA conference, discussing the myriad and exciting paths that Auckland is on right now. And as we ask, what's the best route? And I've got to tell you, doing a bit of reading into Auckland transport and infrastructure history, it makes a fascinating read. For example, what do you think had the world's first coast-to-coast tram service? What city? Wasn't San Francisco, wasn't Toronto, it was Auckland City. CBD to Orehanga, 1902, and that electric link service ran for the next 50 years. In 1923, the idea of a rail link in Auckland is first proposed by Minister of Railways, Gordon Coates, and an underground rail link is proposed in 1968 by then Mayor Dove Meyer Robinson. But in 1955, Auckland's future is set in stone. Auckland adopts the Master Transport Plan, very Jetson sounding, and it focuses on making Auckland the motorway city. And it focuses on traffic, and since then we have been stuck in traffic for the past 62 years, it seems. As for rail, 1983 was a close call. The Auckland Regional Authority seriously considered abolishing the entire rail system, never got underway. But we do have quite a history of transport in Auckland City, and boy, times are a-changing. So on that note, I'll hand it over to the Mayor of Auckland, Phil Goff, to talk about, if not livable, then what? Phil.
Inga mana, inga reo, e nā hoe whā, e rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. No mai, haere mai, piki mai ki Tamaki Makaurau. And welcome to the RMLA to come back to Auckland, I think after 11 years for your conference this year. Can I just make some acknowledgements, first of all, to Te Aroha Morahu. He's just left, but in his absence, what a fantastic opening and what an inspirational speech, which is, I think, says something about the future and the future place of tangata whenua in Tamaki Makaurau and in New Zealand. I think that speech can give us a lot of confidence. Can I acknowledge Environment Court Judge Jeff Smith? Can I acknowledge Justice Tony Randerson? I'm not sure whether Tony's here yet. Yes, I think, maybe, but it is presence or absence to acknowledge the critical role that he played in chairing the review group that led to the Resource Management Act. Can I acknowledge local board members here? I see some members of the Waitemata local board. If I can acknowledge Pippa Coombe and Richard Northey, there may be others. And last but certainly not least, Marie Baker-Galloway, President of the RMLA. Thank you for choosing to have your conference this year in our city of Auckland. You've asked me to speak, and I'll read what you've asked me to speak on, just so you know that I'm on track. My vision for Auckland's development in the face of rapid densification, growing traffic congestion, strain on infrastructure, and super diversity. I'm not sure whether they're meant to be positives or negatives, but we'll talk about them. And the key challenge, and it was the cryptic question, if not livability, then what? And I see the title of the conference is Livability, and of course I'm not using that as a slogan for Auckland. So I should start by explaining that. It's not that livable is not desirable, of course it is, but I wanted something that was a little more ambitious than that and a little more specific. So what I talk about, I guess my ambition for Auckland, is for it to be a world-class city where talent wants to live. A city that is innovative and smart. A city that is inclusive, both of its diversity and ethnicity, but also of all of its people, so no one is left behind. And certainly not last, or least I should say, a city that sustains a beautiful and clean environment. The challenges that you set out in your questions to me are very real ones. We're currently, as a city, growing by 50,000 additional residents a year. Just focus on that figure for a moment. That is, we are adding a population the size of Tauranga City each and every year. And has that put pressure on our physical and our social infrastructure? The answer, of course, is yes. We have created a unitary city of Auckland, and that is really important from the viewpoint of governing the city and maintaining a uniformity of standards across its breadth. We've put in place our unitary plan, and I pay tribute to the last council for achieving that. It wasn't easy in the face of people who wanted to resist the change that inevitably comes when you build a city that will reach 2 million people within a decade or slightly longer. So those changes were positive changes, but there was a major omission in what the government of the day did when they created the so-called super city. That omission was to create a revenue base that will enable us to build the infrastructure to meet the needs of that population growth without diminishing the quality of our life and without damaging the ease of doing business in our city. And it's important to have a vision, and I'm going to talk about the vision for Auckland, but a vision remains a mirage unless you have the mechanism for converting what you want to achieve into reality, and to do that you need to fund it, and in particular you need the infrastructure. The problem of infrastructure and of funding is something that has to be addressed urgently for this city. And on Saturday we will know, maybe we won't know, but within a couple of weeks we will know who is going to be the government of New Zealand for the next 3 years. And the urgent priority I have to address to them is how we can fund our city and how we can create the infrastructure so that our city can contribute everything that it is capable of to New Zealand rather than being a problem for New Zealand. Without that infrastructure, we face a city that risks gridlock. We add 799 cars every week to our roads in Auckland. And we haven't provided the infrastructure not to cope with the cars, but actually to find alternatives to the cars. We have a huge excess of demand over supply of housing, and that has caused a housing shortage, and that in turn has caused unaffordability, and we need to address that. We need to address the pressures that population growth put on our environment. Not all of those pressures come just from recent growth. For 100 years, this city has had a combined stormwater and wastewater system that means every time it rains, just in the Western Isthmus area to the west of us here, there are more than 70 outflows from our wastewater that flood into our streams and our beaches between 26 and 52 times a year. Now, every one of those problems is a fixable problem, and we have to fix them in order for Auckland to make the contribution to this country it is capable of. This city is now 36% of New Zealand's entire population. It is 38% of its GDP. But the most important figure is this: it is gaining 50% plus of the country's growth. In order for New Zealand to succeed, this city has to succeed. This is an international city. This is the city that New Zealand has that makes it capable of being globally competitive. One of the people that I admire is the late Sir Paul Callaghan. And Callaghan's favourite saying was that for New Zealand to succeed, it needed to be a place where talent wanted to live. Te Arawa talked about tourism and he talked about dairy, but actually we need to be much more than that for this country to keep on being in the top group of countries internationally. And that is, we do need to be an innovative city, a clever city that attracts talent to this country, but just as importantly, retains the talent that we have here. If we cannot be that, if we cannot be the city that offers choice and opportunity and work in education and in leisure, we will continue to lose those people. We will lose them to Sydney, we will lose them to Melbourne, we will lose them to 400 comparable cities that can provide those things for their people. And we want to keep the best and the brightest of our people, and we want to attract the best migrants, and we want to attract the quality investment. So how do we go about doing that for New Zealand? Well, I believe that we start with a lot of advantages. We do have a beautiful environment, and I know that you're doing field trips, or there's some other euphemism for that, including vineyards in Waiheke and other such important venues, and you will see a city with 1,000 beaches, a city with a beautiful gulf and islands. You'll see our monga, you'll see our parks and reserves. You will also, if you come from other parts of the country, notice the incredible diversity of our city. 40% of Aucklanders were born overseas. I don't think there are many cities in the world that match that. And what do we offer through that diversity? We offer a unique Maori culture, which is our point of difference to the world. We are the world's largest Polynesian city. We have large, vibrant populations in the Chinese and the Indian communities that bring their hard work, their entrepreneurship, and their rich and ancient cultures for us to enjoy. With all of that diversity, we are largely a tolerant, harmonious, and respectful community. And here in New Zealand, we offer people from around the world a stable, safe, and peaceful place to live. We have world-class educational institutions. We are largely free of corruption, and we have a city capable of strong governance and strong management. So our task is to build on those strengths and to meet the challenges that rapid population growth pose for us. And that entails, for many Aucklanders, a change in the traditional culture. Wallace said just before, in the 1950s, we made a far-sighted decision that we would build suburbs and we would build motorways and we would rely on the car for the future. That world has changed and we need to change with it. As we reach towards 2 million people, we need intensification of housing focused around our city centre and our city hubs and our major arterial routes. Around 70% of the future housing development in our city will be brownfields, not greenfields development. But with intensification come certain prerequisites. Those prerequisites are good urban design. They are high quality public open spaces, and they are good infrastructure. Here at the Events Centre, we are adjacent to the Wynyard Quarter. Take some time to wander around that. Look at the Viaduct Basin. If you get a chance, go out to Hobsonville Point, and you will see the potential of what we as a city can do with intensification. Nobody ever goes to the centre of Paris and say, this place is one of the most intensive cities in the world, it must be terrible to live here. We can create good intensification and we can create choice and opportunity. From almost no residents a couple of decades ago, our CBD now has a resident population of 45,000 people, and within a decade that will be 75,000. We need to lift the pace and the scale of housing construction and regeneration if we are to tackle the problems of shortage of housing and affordability. We have the unwanted title of being the fourth least affordable city in the world. That needs to change, but it will take time. The Mayoral Housing Task Force brought together local government, central government, the private sector, and we came out with recommendations for the council, for the private sector, and for central government as to how we can tackle and succeed in tackling that particular challenge. And yes, it's about more houses, but it's about much more than simply physical structures. It's about visionary placemaking to create stronger communities and making this a great place for people to live. And we need a new approach too on transport, which challenges the predominance of cars in our city. That also requires culture change. That will be difficult, but it is happening. 2 weeks ago, we celebrated Auckland Rail carrying 20 million or having 20 million passenger journeys in the last year. That's up from 3.4 million just a decade ago. And when we finish the City Rail Link, which started about 5 years too late and will finish 5 years too late for what the city needs, we will be able to double the capacity of our heavy rail. We need light rail across the CBD and from the CBD and across the isthmus. And guess what? It will follow one of the old tram routes. And we need that light rail out to the airport and around to cover the east of Auckland. We need it on the next harbour crossing across to the shore, because there's no good bringing more cars into the city. There's no place for them to go, and we need it out to the west. We also need more walkways and cycleways, and we are opening them every month. Most of us as kids walked or cycled to school. So there's a bit of back to the future here. Currently, 3% of our secondary students walk or cycle to school. That's crazy. We have to have a system of safe routes so people can choose the healthy option of walking and cycling and get safely to school. And guess what? That reduces carbon emissions and it reduces the congestion, the 10% of extra traffic peak hour mornings that people taking their kids to school by car actually produce. Pedestrian traffic in our city is growing. The number of pedestrians down Queen Street has doubled in the last 6 years. So what do I see for Queen Street? I see it as something like Swanson Street in Melbourne, where you have light rail as mass transit and you have a pedestrian mall. I see down Victoria Street, running from Albert Park down to Victoria Park, a linear park that makes our city a greener, a more attractive, a safer and a more pleasant way of walking about it, and that is in our plans as well. On the health of our beaches and our waterways that Te Arawa mentioned, we have to turn around the situation of dumping wastewater into our harbours. It's a huge job. It will cost several $billions, but next year, actually this year, we are starting the design and the business case for huge new central interceptors, for more storage tanks, for green infrastructure so that we can restore the health of our beaches. Now, all of those things are important. All of those things are part of our vision for a great city, but we have to pay for them. And how are we going to do that? Well, we have taken to government already the concept of a special purpose vehicle, which is a Crown infrastructure partnership to fund those infrastructure projects in a way that does not add debt to our council's books, because we are already at our debt to revenue ratio and we cannot exceed that without losing our credit rating. We have to have funding streams to pay for that, and we will hypothecate the funds to the task that is being undertaken. So there will need to be higher water rates to pay for cleaner water. We will need, if we're to meet the $27 billion cost of infrastructure, transport infrastructure for the next decade, we will need road pricing. I said that during the campaign. And whichever government is in power, they will need to adopt something like a road pricing system. In the short term, that's probably a regional fuel tax. We need that to pay. We need revenue sharing. If you look at Australian cities, how do they pay for their infrastructure? They have revenue sharing from federal to state government that builds that infrastructure. So guess what? I've got a great idea for government. We pay 15% GST on every rate dollar that we pay in our city. Wouldn't it be a good idea if the government gave that back to us? It'd be a great idea from my point of view. It raises $239 million. But we need those revenue bases to achieve and realise the dream for our city. I want to finish by just mentioning 2021. 2021 is an important year for Auckland. In March, we will have the first defence of the America's Cup, and that will bring, directly involved with the race itself, 25,000 people to the city, and they will be here for a prolonged period, many of them. The eyes of the world will be on us, and we can showcase the beauty of our harbour, we can showcase world-leading technology. And in November and leading up to November, we will have APEC, when we have the presidents of China, of the United States, hopefully a new one. I heard him described by a Korean translator, South Korean translator this morning, as President Chump. I thought that was quite interesting. We will have the Prime Minister of Japan. We will have the leaders of the world. This is a chance for us to showcase Auckland and New Zealand as smart, as innovative, as protecting our environment, as being a great place to live and a great place to invest. So that gives us a target to work for, but it's only one of our target dates. There is much work to do for the future. Thank you for the invitation to be with you this morning. Please enjoy the conference and please enjoy your stay in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. I hope it's a fruitful and enjoyable visit for those of you from out of town. Thank you very much. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Microphone up. I kind of, I've got to admit, Phil, I tuned out when I heard a bit of a factoid, and that was, is this true? Did you say 800 new cars every week in Auckland City?
Yep, we increased, the new car registrations are over 800 each and every week in Auckland.
Hang on, I'll just get this. Say that again?
800. And they all travel on the road that I travel into each morning, so I know about it.
Hang on, but that's 42,000 new cars a year.
That's right. Those are the New Zealand transport statistics.
Shit. I've got to say on that note, I'm born and bred in Auckland, and ladies and gentlemen, I've never owned a car. Round of applause for me, I think. And I've got to say, Phil, a bit of a bouquet. Those new double-decker buses are fantastic. They work very, very well.
Yeah, they work really well, but we've already got bus congestion in Auckland. On Simon Street in peak hour, we run 146 buses an hour, so we're going to have to replace that with light rail. That's an inevitability.
All right, good on. Good for being here. Right, next to the key speaker. I've got to say, first up, though, a big thank you to all our sponsors. Without the support of the fantastic sponsors that have come on board for this conference, it would not be possible to get some of the fantastic sort of keynote speakers from overseas or indeed around the country. So a huge thank you for all those who put their hand up to support this look at it, this massive event, and also a mention to Anderson Lloyd for enabling me to be here for the event and not in Wellington for the election. Much happier to be here. Now, our first conference keynote this morning will be presented by Jennifer Keesmaat, Chief Planner for the City of Toronto. This keynote is hosted in partnership with Auckland Conversations and proudly sponsored by Boffa Miskill, New Zealand's leading consultants on environmental planning and design. The Auckland Conversations program is an Auckland Council initiative that presents international and national experts that can inspire and inform on how cities can be transformed to become livable, well-designed and connected places where people want to live, work and play. So we'd like to acknowledge the Auckland Conversation sponsors and give a warm welcome to the live stream audience that's joining the session this morning on the Auckland Conversations website, conversations.aucklandcouncil.govt.nz, and also on the live Twitter feed, hashtag Auckland Conversations and hashtag Liveable. It's now a pleasure to invite Rachel DeLambert, partner at Boffa Miskill, to the stage to welcome Jennifer Keesmaat.
We have to do that height challenge thing. Ludo and I will be about level pegging. Sorry, had to do it. Kia ora tātou, and thank you, Wallace, my Sunday morning friend. Boffa Miskill's really very pleased to be part in bringing Jennifer Keesmaat to Auckland and to the RMLA Liveable conference. Jennifer's a planner and urban designer, and she's a perfect fit for the themes of the conference, and I think that you're all in for a real treat in terms of her presentation this morning. Now, Toronto perhaps isn't the city that we have tended to follow closely in this part of the world, given that I think we're much more attracted to those West Coast cities of America, the Vancouvers, San Francisco, LA. But when you look at the challenges that we face in Auckland and then Toronto's, particularly around livability, housing, affordability, and then the relationship of transport with housing and land use integration, but then also how you take communities with you in cities of rapid growth and change, then I think we have an incredible amount to learn from Toronto. And Jennifer's perfectly placed with her roles in relation to the Chief Planner at Toronto, the City of Toronto, and in her earlier initiatives and roles to bring real lessons for us here in Auckland. There are certainly a lot of parallels, and I think there are many insights that Jennifer can bring from those roles, and I think probably her struggles and challenges as much as her many successes in the various roles that she's had. So very shortly I will say welcome to the stage, but before I do that you might see me also depart, which I notice everybody to date has, which is a bit unfortunate. Through a trick of ill fate on my part and the Environment Courts, I'm actually due there very shortly. And as we know, that's a bit of a non-negotiable. So I'm going to be listening to the delayed feed rather than the live presentation, and I'm going to look forward to catching up with Jennifer later in the day. So without further ado, Jennifer, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It is absolutely thrilling to be here. And I have to tell you that when I got off the plane, of course, the first thing I did was went for a walk up Queen Street, and I popped in this little store, and there was a map. And on this map, they had, in fact, flipped the world around. And so instead of being on the bottom of the globe, New Zealand and Australia were on the top of the globe. And I have to tell you that I stared at this map for a very long time because it was really discombobulating to see the world flip the other way. And of course, we all know the Earth is round and there's no top and there's no bottom. But of course, this idea that I'm not at the bottom of the world, but as I stand in front of you at the top of the world is a very powerful one. So it's thrilling to be here in New Zealand with you at the top of the world. I'm going to have to buy that map and take it home for my kids to give them a little bit of perspective. I'm going to talk to you today about Toronto. And I'm going to talk to you about Toronto because there are things that are happening in Toronto that might have something to say of relevance to what's happening here in Auckland. And I say this in part because the comments from your mayor as an introduction made it abundantly clear that there are a tremendous number of similarities. The way we're changing, the way we're growing, in fact, are very similar. So what I'd like to do, trusting that my slides will appear, is begin by telling you a little bit about some of the transformation that's happening in the City of Toronto. Of course, it's always a good thing to talk about what you know, and so I am going to focus on the transformations that we see in our city as they might be relevant in order to provide some fodder for the conversation that I'm going to have with Ludo after the presentation. Are the slides coming up there? There we go. Very much like Auckland, one of the things that we've learned in Toronto over the course of the past decade is that we're popular. We're in fact doing some things right. I hear that you're growing by 50,000 people on an annual basis. We're actually growing by 100,000 people on an annual basis, and all the constraints that come along with that. As we grow and change, one of the things we're committed to doing is becoming something fundamentally different than what we were. Our goal as we grow is to become more livable, to become more sustainable, to use the growth and the opportunities that we see that come with growth to become a fundamentally transformed place. This is a slide of our city. Our city, like yours, is an amalgamated region. 15 years ago, we were 7 cities. Now we're 1 city. This area is 613 square kilometers, to give you a sense of scale. And right in the very center, there's 17 square kilometers that are, in fact, the most urban part of the city, the downtown core. And that part of the city is growing 4 times faster than the rest of the city. And this is important because what we've seen is that it's the most urban part of the city that is, in fact, as a result of the transition that we've been going through, becoming the most attractive part of the city to transform. Now, of course, downtowns are in vogue all across North America, and you could argue across the world, but in fact, none have grown at the same scale that we're growing in downtown Toronto. And you can just imagine all the infrastructure problems, because you're facing some of them here, that come with this rapid growth. So whereas currently there's approximately 250,000 people living in the downtown, we're projecting that in another 20 years' time, there'll be 475,000 people living just in that 17 square kilometers within the context of a 600 square kilometer city. So one of our challenges is how we spread the growth out, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In addition, this is our employment hub. 51% of the national GDP is actually generated in this 17 square kilometers, and over 500,000 jobs are also in this core, projected to be 750,000 jobs within another 20-year period. So we're packing a tremendous amount of intensity into this core. Now, this is as a result of an intentional shift. This is an outcome of planning policy. This is a result of trying to do things differently, to become something different from that very suburban typology that exists across the city. So you can see in the bottom bar here, the City of Toronto's overall growth. Now you can see in the second bar, downtown's growth. And you see that in the last decade, we've been attracting the growth into our most urban areas. Now, the third bar at the top of the screen is the most suburban part of our region, and you can see an enormous decline in that suburban growth. And I'll tell you why that is in a minute. But there's a fundamental question that every city must confront. You cannot grow out and grow up and offer a high quality of life. If you're going to be adding more people and you're going to be adding more cars, your environmental footprint will only get larger. Your quality of life will only decline as the long commute becomes a part of everyday life. So driving growth into existing built-up areas is about livability. It's also about affordability, because it's pretty expensive to drive everywhere as opposed to walking and cycling. So this is a critical question that cities must struggle with. And one of the transformations that has taken place over the past 15 years in Toronto is that we are now primarily building multiples, higher density housing. We're building very little suburban sprawl. That's why we see that shift on that graph. Almost 90% of the new housing in 2016, 90% was multiples, condos and apartments, as opposed to single-family homes. This is about reducing our congestion. This is about becoming a more sustainable city. This is about long-term livability and affordability, embracing a new kind of built form that creates an opportunity to live with a smaller environmental footprint and a stronger sense of community. So our skyline is changing. It's becoming denser. This is what the downtown looked like just 10 years ago. And this is what it looks like today. This is the transformation, and I'll go back so you can see that again, in just one decade. And in the next decade, this transformation is going to happen again. And the question becomes, as we become denser, can our quality of life go up? Can affordability go up? And it can if we get the big moves and the smaller moves right. We have a tremendous way to go to get there. And one of the hottest topics of conversation in Toronto is our infrastructure deficit, the quality and character of our public spaces, affordability, traffic congestion, and investing in transit. So we know we are only part way along on this journey, but I'm going to show you some of the things that we're doing to try to shift our course to become a more sustainable, livable, and affordable city. Now, this is our downtown core. Our peak density isn't too bad. We're at approximately 17,000 people per square kilometer, but our average density in the city is very low. And this is a reflection of the fact that we're a spiky city. Very high density in the core of the city, and then very low density in our suburbs. So a clue to what needs to change is actually transforming our suburbs. We are focusing on that missing middle. How do we, in fact, add mid-rise density to bridge that gap between the spiky, really high-density parts of the city and the lower-density parts of the city? And to put this in perspective, our peak density is about the same as London, England. But the average density in London is much higher because it's not a spiky city like we are. And then, of course, New York is way off the map. We're at 17,000 people per square kilometer. New York's peak density is 58,000 people per square kilometers. We don't actually aspire to that. That's not our objective. But the average density is approximately 10,000 people per square kilometers, which is actually a very reasonable amount of density. And remember, there's all kinds of great benefits that come with this level of density, including the opportunity to do a whole variety of things within walking distance of home. You only get that from density, having that critical mass that allows people to live in relatively small communities, but also to have a really sophisticated transit network that allows you to get anywhere to anywhere on transit that only exists when you start getting these higher densities, because otherwise you just can't get the frequency of service, or you can't get the price to provide that frequency of service that makes transit a true option. So when we're looking at intensifying our city, we're driving our growth to our main transit corridors, and I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. So we see ourselves at a moment where we have a real massive convergence taking place at the highest policy level and at the detailed precinct planning level that is allowing us to turn the city into something better, to make it something different from what it has been in the past. And we have to start at the highest level. We have been, for the past 30 years, sprawling outwards. 10 years ago, our provincial government brought in our Green Belt Plan. This is 1 million hectares of land that has been protected as agricultural land. We copied on a big scale what Portland, Oregon did 40 years ago on a small scale. We put a green belt in place. And the objective of the green belt was to shift land economics in such a way that we are now driving growth into our existing built-up areas. This is really important. You do not get intensification on a significant scale unless you limit what's happening on the edges of the city. You can't grow out and up at the same time. You can't suck and blow. And this policy framework is about saying, hold on a minute. We're going to shift the way growth happens in our region. We're going to drive those growth to those areas where we already have infrastructure. And we're going to do this precisely because we want to become a transit-oriented region. We want to get those densities to a point where transit becomes the viable alternative. So this high-level policy framework is really the key starting point that allows everything else you're going to see in this presentation become a reality. But we also know that young people have a very different desire in terms of their consumer preference for how they want to live in urban places. And cities that aren't attracting young people, of course, are going to eventually go into decline. So we recognize catering to young people in transforming how we change as a city as being essential. We know that young people, they want to walk to work. We know that they want to move by bike. We know that they're no longer getting their driver's licenses when they turn 16 if they have that choice. So we're trying to change the city to increase the choices for walking, cycling, and living very close to where you work. And if we look at that downtown core that is seeing the bulk of our growth, a fascinating thing has happened. 75% of the population walks or cycles to work in the downtown. This is fabulous from a sustainability perspective, but also from a quality of life and an affordability perspective, because these young people do not need to own a car. They do not need to pay for parking. They do not need insurance. They do not need gas. They pay a little bit more for a smaller space in the core as a trade-off for a higher quality of life and a more sustainable way of living. But we've also discovered that across the city as a whole, even in our suburban areas, that people want complete communities. They want the option to do a variety of things within walking distance of home. Pembina Institute is an organization that conducts research in Canada, and they put out a survey and they asked, would you be willing to trade off a smaller home with a smaller yard in exchange for being within walking distance to shopping, the doctor, the dentist, transit, and or a larger yard, a larger home, but you don't have those amenities within walking distance at a lower price point. 86%, in fact, chose walking. This is really important data that gives us an input into focusing on creating those complete communities by transforming our traditional suburbs. So this is our urban structure plan, and this is a really important part of the narrative that is driving the transformation that you're going to see in the upcoming slides. The downtown core is the mustard yellow piece that you see. The linear areas that are shown as brown are our avenues. Those are areas where we are adding mid-rise development as a way of increasing the mix of uses and the density in the traditional car-oriented suburbs, but they also correspond to our rapid transit corridors. So we are directing our growth to our main transit corridors, because as we grow, we don't want to add cars. We simply do not have the road capacity to add more cars. In fact, we want to take away capacity for cars and add it for pedestrians and cyclists. And this is a critical part of our vision of becoming a more livable, sustainable, and affordable city. So this is a little bit what that looks like. This is along a highway and a subway corridor. It's about adding green sidewalks. This is right in the heart of our suburbs in our city. We are adding mid-rise development. This project is under development today. It's about adding a critical mass of housing around our main transit corridors in a green environment that is pedestrian-oriented, that gives people the choice of living without a car. We recognize that affordability isn't an outcome of great urbanism, although it is necessary to it. And this is a really important point, because the world over, we face a great risk that as we create great cities, they increasingly become more and more exclusive. They become playgrounds for the rich. This is happening in my city. We're seeing global capital from all over the world landing in our city. And this is driving up housing prices and creating a risk that people who live and work in the city cannot afford housing in the city. There's only one way, in my experience, to address this, and it's by having intentional policy that seeks to create a city for all. It's about being explicit at the outset that our cities will be places not just for tourists, but will be places where people can live and work, and in particular, raise a family. And in the next slide, as I walk through some examples of changes that we've made, I'll talk about what some of those intentional policy mechanisms are. Because just investing in public space will not make your city inclusive. Investing in great transit will, in fact, drive housing prices up. It will make your city more exclusive. If that's not the goal, then thinking about affordability and policy measures to drive affordability is critical. Now, let me be clear, we have not solved this in Toronto, but there's a variety of things that we're doing to ensure that we're adding affordable housing, and we're seeking to become more and more aggressive as we do that. The first key move that we're making is urbanizing our avenues, and this is about embracing the mid-rise city. So going back to that map, it's those brown areas on this map, those linear corridors, when we can add linear neighborhoods that we are currently transforming. This is the built form typology. We have mid-rise guidelines to drive this typology. Our goal is to create great pedestrian environments So we don't want these buildings to be too tall because we need sunlight on the sidewalks. We need Main Street retail so that they function as part of an existing neighborhood. These are all projects that are either built or currently under construction in the city. This is an example of that mid-rise typology being added right in the heart of our suburbs. But it can take a lot of different forms. This is another example of gentle intensification. You can see that the taller forms have been pushed into the center of the block. And this is another example, and this is one of my favorite examples because it conforms directly to our mid-rise guidelines. You can see the higher stories step back. That is to ensure that we maintain the sunlight on the sidewalk. But what you can also see in this slide, that this is a new building in a built form that is in a state of transformation. Look at the buildings to the east and the buildings to the west. They have yet to transform to adopt this mid-rise typology. This is about adding a new form in an environment where it doesn't yet exist. And this is another great slide that shows the city in a state of evolution. Adding more housing density. This is a streetcar corridor in the city. Now this is a suburban corridor, which I like to call Anywhere USA, although it's Anywhere Toronto, because these wide arterial roads, I suspect you've got a few of them here in Auckland as well, that in fact are faced with a tremendous amount of surface parking. They too can become something fundamentally different. So the example here I'm going to show you is a corridor that is 22 kilometers long, running right through the heart of the city. Not all of it looks like this typology, which is very suburban, and some of it is more urban. But the big move on this corridor is to add LRT. So we are currently building out 22 kilometers of LRT right through the heart of the city. But we're also transforming the street, adding cycling lanes, widened sidewalks, and green infrastructure along the streetscape, and then also adding a mid-rise typology along the corridor. Now, this is the suburbs. This is about transforming the suburbs to become walkable, linear neighborhoods with new levels of density. Remember that slide that I showed you of the Greenbelt Plan? This isn't possible without the Greenbelt Plan. The Greenbelt Policy Framework directs growth into our existing areas. In the absence of the plan, there's no incentive to not do the easy thing, because the easy thing is to keep sprawling outward, to continue building suburbs and greenfields. This is actually a little bit trickier and involves public investment like LRT. But because of that larger policy framework, we can deliver on this new vision. And this is the same typology, but where the LRT is below grade. It's below grade for 11 kilometers. This is that same area. This is the built form framework that has been approved by City Council, and the streetscape is currently under construction today. It's a far cry from that highway typology that it is today. And this is how we are seeking to become a more livable city. Now, this is that entire corridor right through the heart of the city. The public investment is the LRT, the new streetscape, the new sidewalks, the cycling infrastructure. It has been followed by an astronomical level of private investment. 17,000 residential units are proposed along this corridor. And you know what's so powerful? Many of those projects will have their parking requirements forgiven. No parking. Because the people who live along this corridor will not need to own a car. So we're adding population density without adding more cars. We're adding population density in the places where we can provide transportation choice. Because of the density in the linear neighborhoods and the mix of uses, you can walk to work, you can walk to the doctor, you can walk to the dentist, you can walk to do your grocery shopping, or you can take a cycling lane, or you can connect into the broader city's transit network on LRT. This is the opportunity of creating places that are fundamentally different from how they looked in the past. This is another example, Dufferin Avenue. You can see here that there's many strip malls. This too is right in the heart of our suburbs. And you can see here, what I like about this slide is you can see how it's right up against single-family homes. To the bottom side of those slides, those are all single-family homes. Currently, if you live in one of those homes, you get in your car to do everything because you must. You really don't have a lot of choices. But urbanizing the avenue is about providing choice within walking distance of home and adding new housing typologies along the corridor. That strip malls, those parking lots are being transformed into this, a new amenity in the suburbs. We're urbanizing our suburbs to make them more sustainable places. The second key way that we're responding to this mandate of creating a livable and affordable city is by urbanizing our classic suburbs by adding gentle density and new housing types. This is a typical 1950 strip mall. This is a picture from when it was originally built. This is what it looks like today. This is right in the heart of one of our most beautiful suburbs in Etobicoke. Very high-end housing. And here, too, you pretty much have to drive everywhere, including if you want to go to this mall. There's no pedestrian connections to the adjacent suburbs. So we are transforming this into a hub right in the heart of the suburbs, the idea being that there will be choice in terms of how you can move, the destinations that you can walk to. So this is what this new community will look like. It will include affordable housing, seniors housing. There's still parking here, but the parking has been put underground. All of the new buildings conform to our green roof bylaw, where we require green roofs. And there's a whole variety of new housing types that have been added here. Now, I have a personal story that I'll tell you, which is my husband actually grew up in this classic suburb. And 4 siblings, his parents had a pretty big house, and when the kids moved out of the house, they had this great big house. They loved their neighborhood. They didn't want to move out of their neighborhood, but there was one pretty simple problem. There wasn't anywhere to move in the neighborhood. And I like to tell them that this project is for them. Unfortunately, it came 10 years too late. They could have stayed in their neighborhood if this has been built, because urbanizing your classic suburbs is about adding choice that can respond to people at all ages of their lifespan. So young people can live here, but people who are downsizing can live here too. Now, my in-laws would never move into the downtown core of the city. That's too urban for them. But to stay in a classic suburbs, in a different housing typology, now that would have been a real choice. And we failed in terms of our public policy because we didn't have this choice. And now we are going to have this choice by urbanizing our classic suburbs. And this is a little bit of what some of the amenity will look like in that new area. The third way that we're responding to livability is about detailed precinct planning, ensuring that the promise materializes. It's one thing to say that we're going to densify the city, and then it's another to actually get the mix of uses right in such a way that this is a really high quality of life. In fact, for many people, one of the reasons why they don't actually like density is because there's so many high density projects in our cities that are not well done. The design detail compromises walkability, sustainability, and quality of life. So on a brownfield site, in our downtown core, very close to our waterfront, we have a precinct called the West Don Lands. And for 30 years, almost my whole life, this has just been a brownfield with some old neglected heritage buildings. Well, we've protected those heritage buildings, and we've created a precinct plan. And as a result of hosting the Pan Am Games in 2015, we fast-tracked the building out of this neighborhood. Now, what's important about this neighborhood is it's about a 10-minute walk to the downtown. We've required that 20% of all the units are affordable units. We've also added student housing. We've added university uses. We've added housing for our First Nations communities and servicing for our First Nations community. But we've also added market housing. So this is a true, complete, mixed-use community with a really high-quality public realm that becomes really the hook that all of these different uses hang on. This is, in fact, what it looks like today. You can see there's a couple more parcels that are now under construction, and there's 2 more parcels that have just been released by the province for 720 new affordable housing units. Leveraging provincially owned lands and precincts where we've done our master planning for affordable housing, requiring 20% affordable housing is a key way that we're delivering on our mandate for new affordable precincts. And this is what the street level condition looks like. This is what the quality of the public realm looks like. This is a little bit different from the old model 20, 30 years ago, where we created clusters of affordable housing and we didn't mix it with market housing, and where we didn't focus on a really high quality public realm. The objective here is to ensure that the high quality public realm actually creates gathering places for social interaction in the community. But we're also really preoccupied with ensuring that families can live in these dense urban places. We've just completed a study called Growing Up Vertical, which is all about raising families in high-rise and mid-rise communities. We worked with architects, interior designers, and we focused on really 3 scales: getting the unit design right, the building right, but also the neighborhood right. So this precinct has one of the best children's parks in the city. Why? Because we want to make living in vertical communities a first choice for families. We don't want to force families into environments where they have to have a long commute that compromises family life. We want families, we want parents to have the opportunity to drop children off in the daycare in their building and then to walk 5 or 10 minutes to work, so that they can walk back to the daycare if they've got a sick kid, or they can walk home at lunchtime to visit their child and then walk back to work. This is the dream that we can offer in vertical communities. Today, many families get pushed way out into the suburbs to find housing that's affordable, and they end up compromising time with their family. Why? Because they're sitting in a car for 45 minutes each way. We're stealing their time from their children. And this is why we created our Growing Up Vertical policies. It's about ensuring that affordable housing in the core of the city that offers excellent quality of life for families is what we are delivering on. We're also focusing on strategic, site-specific infill. Now, I don't even know if this is a challenge in New Zealand, but in the 50s in Toronto, we did build some higher density housing in our suburbs. And it's Tower in the Park. The assumption was that people would drive everywhere. This housing very quickly became very poor quality housing. In fact, this housing is frequently where many immigrants will go because the housing is cheap. And it's cheap because it's disconnected from any kind of amenity or urban vibrancy, and it's also typically disconnected from transit. So we're thinking very carefully about how we can add transit, but also transform this housing into being a high-quality form of housing. There's over 2,000 of these apartment towers in the Toronto region, home to over 1 million people. And this is affordable housing in Toronto. So the question becomes, how do we ensure this is high-quality housing? We have a dream that every immigrant coming into our city within 1 generation is a part of the middle class. We don't really have a significant problem with multi-generational poverty that you see in some countries that are also high receptacles for immigrants. About 50% of Torontonians are foreign born. And within 1 generation, most of those immigrant families actually have a university education and are absorbed into the professional class. That is a critical part of our democracy and of the Canadian dream. But improving this housing and ensuring that we make it easier to integrate into Canadian society through access to libraries, access to transit, that provides access to jobs and education, is one of the key challenges that we're trying to solve. So I'll give you an example. It's called Parkway Forest. Think of the most suburban suburbia you possibly can. Highway interchanges, big malls, low density. That's Parkway Forest. You can see here the ground floor before and after for those who are urban designers in the room. Buildings that were floating in the middle of the site, unowned park spaces that were dangerous and unused, were transformed by bringing the buildings up to the street, creating a street wall, infilling strategically. This is what that looks like. We added new mid-rise buildings in order to create a street edge, to create a pedestrian realm, to make these communities walkable communities that connected into a new subway station. Also adding buildings that allowed for a mixture of uses. These buildings at the edge of the street can have not-for-profit agencies, grocery stores, a whole variety of amenities that didn't exist within walking distance before. You had to own a car if you lived in this suburban environment. And this is what the infill looks like. Keeping the existing affordable rental housing, adding new housing that can create a clear and legible pedestrian realm. Now, we wanted to figure out a way to draw pedestrians into the site, and so we created a public art installation. These are beacons by Douglas Coupland, the writer of Generation X. He does a lot of public art competitions in the city of Toronto, and the beacons create a legible pedestrian realm within the heart of this new community. And they start at the transit corner and they lead and terminate at a new school, a new community center, and a new pool. This was all about creating spaces where pedestrians belonged in an area where previously it wasn't clear that pedestrians belonged, and quite frankly, people didn't walk because it was dangerous. So new streets with buildings with eyes on the street, new housing forms, so adding market housing where there had only been rental housing before, and also making it very clear that there is a high-quality pedestrian realm and what the pedestrian realm is before. Whereas before there were just a lot of grassy knolls that no one used, but also focusing on those amenities for children and new buildings. The building that you see in the background is a new building. The building on the right is an existing apartment building. New buildings with market housing adjacent to affordable housing. Affordable housing, I think, is what you would call state housing here. And we used a policy mechanism, which we call Section 37. The developer was required, in exchange for this new density, to give us monies as a city that were then used to revitalize the existing state housing or the existing affordable housing. So in this project, housing that had previously been in a state of disrepair, in fact, became revitalized as well. It's a win, win, win. And of course, a new community center that everyone could share. Both those living in affordable and those living in market housing can come together in this new community facility. Another example of a large-scale revitalization, hundreds and hundreds of acres right in the heart of the city. This too, state housing that was highly problematic, no street grid, orphaned public spaces, no mixed uses. It was very difficult for people to buy groceries who lived in this community, even though it was in the heart of downtown Toronto. We've fundamentally transformed this area by adding new street blocks and adding new uses. This is what it looked like before. This is the exact same corner I'm about to show you. This is what it looks like today. This is on a streetcar line. Now there's a grocery store. There is a mixture of affordable or state as well as social housing, as well as market housing. Mixing up these uses to provide new affordable housing and to provide amenity and a mixed-use community. And here's an example of what the first phase looks like that you can see a little bit to the left of the screen. The third phase is at the top of the screen, which hasn't changed yet, and you can see that there's a mixture of building typologies, adding in a high-quality public realm. The area to the south is now a massive park and community center that's already been built out. But creating a legible pedestrian realm, making it very clear that people are welcome and belong in this community, spaces where people can engage with one another, is a key part of the vision of creating these new mixed-use, high-density communities. Investing in our public realm, creating quality public space for public life. The Bentway is a project right in the heart of our downtown, whereby we've taken a superhighway structure which we, for many generations, had a massive fight in the city about whether it should stay up or whether it should come down. Under the many generations of city council, in order to appease suburban voters, it has, in fact, continued to stay up. And in the end, we've decided to work with it. You can see here new communities in the heart of downtown. All of these communities, you can see the population density that's been added. This is within about a 10 square kilometer area. And right in the heart, dividing this community, is this expressway. And so the question became, how do we provide a new amenity for the community and link these neighborhoods together, providing linear access to the core of the city? And the core of the city is right where you see the Sky Dome on the right side of the screen. So this is what that highway infrastructure looks like. We've built up the neighborhoods right adjacent to this highway infrastructure, which is very well used. We're turning it into a dynamic new public space. We've created a new community trust, and it will be a multi-season programmed space that also acts as a linear parkway. What we're trying to do here is take some of the mistakes of the past and actually manipulate them and transform them to become something good, to link together areas of the city that are divided by using this infrastructure in new ways. And we've kind of called these orphaned spaces that we're transforming to link together and connect the city. And this is what the space will look like in the winter. And this space was initiated by a $25 million private sector donation that was matched by a $10 million donation by the city, and it will be open within 6 months' time. We're also investing in waterfront parks, as you are, thinking very carefully about the amenity of the waterfront as being something fundamentally new in the city as we transition from an industrial waterfront to a complete mixed community. We've kept some of our industrial uses. That's a sugar refinery that you see with a blue roof. The area that you see in the foreground is now Sugar Beach. This is what Sugar Beach looks like. One of the things that we've celebrated is the bumping up of the industrial uses with the public amenities and the public uses. We've also added in new office uses, new residential uses. We're transforming the waterfront to become a dynamic public space. This is our wave deck park, and the wave deck is about extending out the public realm to cantilever over the piers to add public space in areas where pedestrians currently get squeezed. This is Wave Deck Park. We're also thinking about using infrastructure in a multitude of ways. The old model was really about public art being public art, infrastructure being infrastructure. This is an example of public art that's also a park, that's also a stormwater management feature. It's extra hard working infrastructure. And we're leading with investment in the public realm, much like you are here in your downtown quarter, investing public dollars to attract private investment. Now, the hook all of this planning hangs on is really our transit network plan. And we've brought forward, I have the great pleasure as Chief Planner of also being responsible for transit planning in the city. We link together intensification and growth with our transit planning. We see those two things as inseparable. If we want to add people but we don't want to add cars, we have to add the density to where transit is or where we're putting transit. And this isn't just about one transit line, it's about a transit network. Just like you create a network for vehicles, transit riders should be able to get anywhere to anywhere in the city on transit using one transfer. We call it the one transfer trip. The idea that you can travel in an L anywhere in the city if you have a network. So what you see here on the screen is the rapid transit network. We are adding a whole variety of different technologies. We're building subways and planning two new subways. We're building 22 kilometers of LRT, but we also have 4 more LRT projects: Waterfront LRT, Eglinton East, Eglinton West. Finch LRT is LRT in our suburbs. We're also adding BRT. We've really taken an approach that we have to look at the typology, the growth in the city, and add the right technology in the right place in order to create a seamless system where people can move from one technology to the next to use transit as their first choice. Transit is really the hook that this entire vision hangs upon. And the last 2 slides I'd like to mention to you is about the way we're doing this. We know it's important to transform the way we think about the city. We actually say in our city policy that we need to change our minds. If we're going to change the city, we need to change our minds. We need to think differently about the city. We say in our policy framework that our goal is to move people, not cars. That's a big new way of thinking in our city, which is primarily suburban. So we've embraced a whole variety of mechanisms to transform the discourse in order to transform the city. We have a whole initiative called Growing Conversations, which might be a bit like your Auckland conversations. I hold chief planner roundtables, which are about asking the questions we don't know the answer to and bringing voices into City Hall that don't usually have access to City Hall. And then we broadcast those conversations, and we use those conversations to generate action plans. We also have something called PIPs, Planners in Public Space. Planners go into public space to talk to the city residents about the future of the city. We go to the places where residents already are. We have a planning review panel. We have selected 28 residents through a civic lottery to be our sounding board. This panel is representative of the incomes in the city, the ownership in the city. It's 50% owners, 50% renters. Believe it or not, they have different things to say. It's representative of the ages of the city. There's lots of young people on here because we've got lots of young people in our city. It's representative of the ethnic diversity of our city. There are hundreds and hundreds of languages spoken in Toronto. This sounding board provides us with advice on our policies that we bring forward to City Council in order to ensure that we are sensitized as planners to the diverse voices, experience, and perspectives that exist in our city. We've also created a youth research team, and the youth research team are youth talking to youth, advising us on how to transform the city. And they've given us many, many recommendations which we're implementing. As an example, I created a podcast called Invisible City Podcast. It's about cities. It's about the things that you don't see that transform and can be transformative in cities. Why? Because youth said to us, you know what? We don't see the relevance of city planning. But we listen to podcasts. If you made a cool podcast, you might be able to get us hooked in. And the podcast has been hugely popular amongst people under the age of 40. A few older people too, I think. We recognize in our city that affordability is a choice and that affordability and livability are inherently and fundamentally conjoined. The risk is that our cities get better, but only for some. They get better, but in an exclusive way. If we're truly committed to the democratic project, if we're truly committed to being an inclusive city, we will in fact choose to create cities that are affordable and livable for all, because after all, it really is a choice. Thank you.
Absolutely inspiring. A big round of applause for Jennifer Keysmat. Next year, you can find me living in Toronto. Honestly, the wave bridge, fantastic. Now, right now we are really running out of time really fast. So I'm just wondering, who reckons we can squeeze 5 or 10 minutes out of coffee break to keep going with Jennifer? You reckon? Yep. Because this is our one and only chance. So I'm going to introduce now Ludo Campbell-Reid. He needs no introduction. Ludo Campbell-Reid is Design Champion, General Manager of the Auckland Design Office at Auckland Council. And among his achievements, he worked on the transformation of London's Canary Wharf, and in 2003 was shortlisted for the London Planning Awards in the category of Best Public Sector Planner. So he's going to be hosting a small Q&A. Ludo, welcome to the podium, and a big round of applause for Ludo here. And if I have time, I will get to some of your questions. Many of you have emailed me through the app, so thank you for that. And again, a big thank you to our sponsors, Boffa, Miskel, and Auckland Conversations. Ludo and Jennifer.
Great. How's the? Does everyone hear me? No.
Can you hear Ludo?
Working. Hello, everybody.
Yep. All right. Turn it up a bit.
A little bit up.
All right.
So Jennifer, it's great to be here, and it's funny I've seen Jennifer for many, many years on YouTube clips. We communicate via Twitter, and it's always great to actually see the person and have a proper conversation. What I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about some of the kind of key tools that you have deployed to help transform Toronto. And I guess just to start as an idea, change. Everybody wants progress, but nobody wants change, it seems. And so your communication techniques amazing. That Chief Planner Roundtable conversation. Why didn't I stand up here?
No, we've got a microphone coming.
Why didn't I just use this for a minute? So so nobody maybe heard. I was just saying that, Jennifer, one of the key things with cities is it's all about change and transformation. And everybody wants progress, but nobody wants change. So there's this big issue around how you help to communicate with the constituents, the elected members, the mayor. Everybody's part of it. Your Chief Planner Roundtable sounds like a really intriguing opportunity to get messages out to the public. How did that work? And was that an elected members in the room, or was it a professional conversation with the public, perhaps?
Sure. So is this one on? It is on. Okay. So Chief Planner Roundtables, I initiated them 5 years ago, and I'll tell you the genesis of them, which was that I was thinking about all these things that I had to do that I didn't know how to do. And I thought, oh, there's some people I need to talk to. I want to bring in some academics. I want to bring in some developers. There's some key community leaders that I'd like to talk to. And then I thought, wait a minute, why not make this conversation public? And so within the committee rooms in City Hall, we have tables that are set up in a semicircle, and then there's also a gallery for the public. And so the Chief Planner Roundtables are 3 hours long, and they're on a whole variety of different topics. The very first one was on resilient cities. We had a whole series that we called Next Generation Suburbs that were on mobility in the suburbs, built form in the suburbs, and then we had one called Arrival City, which was about immigrants in the suburbs. Because several generations ago, immigrants came into the core city, but now immigrants tend to come into the suburbs, and they don't necessarily have the amenities that they need. We've had a roundtable on main streets, on our ravine system, and our ravine strategy. So the roundtables are 3 hours long. The first hour, there are 10-minute presentations by 6 guests who, usually there's a few academics, usually there's some of my colleagues who are within the administration, as well as other key stakeholders. I usually have a developer, someone from the development industry or the real estate industry, or someone from law who will be at the table as well to talk about the issue from their perspective. Each presentation is very different. And then we have a facilitated discussion for the next really hour and a half to 2 hours. But importantly, we trend on Twitter nationally in these conversations, and we also live stream the conversations. And the very first time I did one, we decided we would have people sign up because there's only a limited amount of space in the gallery. And within 24 hours, we had to put in place an overflow room.
Right. And
then we discovered that a lot of people followed live streaming as well. So, I wasn't sure, will people really be interested? Because these are, we have public conversations, and then these conversations get really detailed, and they're sort of inside baseball.
Yeah.
And we discovered that people do really want to do a deep dive on these issues. And then we always create an action document, and there's a whole series. Growing Up Vertical is an outcome. That whole policy document, which has now been approved by City Council, is an outcome of a Chief Planner Roundtable that was on raising families in the city. And the question that we asked in that roundtable that we didn't have the answer to was, how can we make it more affordable and more desirable to raise families in more urban places? Yeah. And that led to the whole Growing Up Vertical initiative, which has been hugely successful and has really transformed the way the development industry is now building their projects.
It's a really useful thing, and you think that people aren't going to be interested, but actually they're citizens of the city, and so absolutely are. And I think that's been a really great success story of Toronto, is actually the city engaging with the people. We have an amazing group of advocates in this city, and we're quite lucky to have them. They're sort of the new generation, the new tweeters, the bloggers, and so forth. We have a couple of groups who are pretty powerful and very helpful. How about your city? Have you got advocacy, people outside who lobby, and are they influential?
Yeah, sure, we do, absolutely. In fact, I would say that an enormous amount of the progress that we've made on our cycling infrastructure, because we put in cycling lanes and we see increases in 600%. We have truly become a cycling city. It's actually a bit astounding to go into our core. Cycling has become very normalized in a really short period of time. A big part of that is Cycle TO, which started out as a cycling union that grew very slowly at first, but they're a cycling lobby that came up with an amazing strategy. We have 44 city councillors, and what they did was basically create lobby groups in each of the 44 wards. It's a lot of work in order to lobby individual councillors, and it really, I worked really closely with them on our messaging, because one of the big things that we wanted to transform the message around was that cycling was seen as being kind of this thing that radical people did and recreational people did, but it wasn't really a form of transportation. And so the key messaging that we worked on was making it really clear that in the 21st century city, cycling is a form of transportation. And if it's a form of transportation, first of all, make it safe, and secondly, make it a real choice. And until it's a real choice, people won't do it because it's not safe. And the minute you make it a real choice, the evidence is conclusive around the world, people will choose it.
Do you have, I should know this, I don't, mandatory helmet laws for your bicycling? Because Jeanette's always told us, there's safety.
It's such a hot topic.
Yeah.
We don't, except for children, under 14.
So that makes a lot of sense, So anyway, we'll move on. But it's interesting when you listen to people like Jennifer, we do know what to do. Most cities should know by now. There's Twitter, there's Google Maps, there's Google Images. We have been inundated with good ideas. The key question is how, and the Mayor talked about funding, and I think that's one of the critical challenges for Auckland, and Wallace and the team have been talking about this earlier. How are we going to fund some of the things that we need to do? If you think about London, it built its underground when its population was 1 million. We're 50 years after that conversation and now trying to retrofit a city. How have you, if you don't, just a couple of key mechanisms for funding outside of the rates?
So this has been a big debate in Toronto, and it's very, very contentious. But we do have, as a result of lobbying the provincial government for many years, we now have a suite of financial tools that we didn't have in the past. So we now have a hotel tax, road pricing is something that we can now use. Parking levies is a new financial tool that we can use. We have a mechanism that I mentioned briefly called Section 37, whereby it's section in our Planning Act where we negotiate with developers for an exchange and uplift in zoning. We take back monies in order to build infrastructure. So specifically, Parkway Forest that I showed you, that community center was paid for by the developer. The public art, the public realm, all of that was paid for the developer in exchange for additional density. So we use those kinds of tools and mechanisms. We now have a federal government which is on side and recognizes the importance of investing in transit. So we just had an announcement for the transit network plan that I just showed you. For some components of it that are still in the planning phases, $4.2 billion from the federal government. This is new. They'd never really, we weren't really on their radar screen before, and we've been working really hard with them to say, hey, this is critical to the survival of the country, is transit in our cities. And so we got the federal government to realize that there has to be a federal role in delivering transit in cities. It goes back to sustaining immigration. It goes back to attracting investment. It goes back to livability and sustainability. And the federal government in Toronto in Canada has been very responsive to that, and it's been transformational. You would never have seen that transit network plan previously without their participation.
I've got a couple of really quick questions here. One from me first, and very briefly. So you've been in Auckland, you're from this extraordinary city of Toronto, and you've been tweeting up a storm while you're here, one of them being a snapshot of this beautiful public sculpture by Michael Parakorwhai, which is your bright-coloured Cuisinairs thing, which reminds me of those sort of rods. You love it. So be honest. What do you think of Auckland from what you've seen? Ludo, block your ears. Be honest, block your ears.
I'm confident it'll be all right.
Well, let me say the first thing, the very first thing that hit me very hard when I got here. Well, I'll be honest, I'll tell you the very first thing, because we just built a rail link from our airport to our downtown.
Here we go.
And I have to tell you, you got to get your ass in gear on that. That is.
Applause for Jennifer.
That's a very big.
We've got to get our shit together, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. But that rail link, ours, I felt like ours was 20 years too late. But I was coming in, and I kept saying to my cab driver, because I was looking at the traffic in the other lane, I said, I'm going to have to leave a day early to get to the airport to get out of here. So we have a rail, a fixed link. It's an express rail link from the downtown. It used to be an hour-long drive. Now it's a 22-minute, very comfortable rail link. It's been very successful. It's not without its controversies, but it is absolutely critical that you do that as soon as possible. I can't say
How about that, Jennifer? Very good. Someone tweet that, by the way. I've got one here from the audience, and I think this is something that needs to be addressed as well. A question: in Auckland, the urban boundary policy has been very controversial and labelled by some as the main reason for housing unaffordability. Jennifer, this has been political, this issue. How difficult was it to get Toronto's Greenbelt policy adopted, and how important is an urban boundary for a city?
Yeah, so the first thing let me say is that it was really hard. It wasn't easy. I don't want to pretend it was easy in any way. It took about 10 years to get it in place. It's been in place now for 10 years, and there's an incredible myth that I'm sure gets perpetuated here because it gets perpetuated in Toronto, and I've heard it from my colleagues in Australia as well as my colleagues in London and Portland. This myth that by putting an urban boundary in place, that drives up land prices and is a detriment to affordability. And you know why that's a myth? Because you don't have a hard boundary right now and you've got a problem with affordability. So it's an absolute and complete myth. Really, the urban boundary is about a whole variety of key drivers. It is about the long-term sustainability and livability of the region. The risk is that you will continue to sprawl. You're adding 50,000 people a year. Imagine you're adding 100,000 people a year. Your commutes are just going to get longer and longer and longer and longer. I invite all of you to come to Toronto and to see our region, because you do not want to make the mistake that we've made. We are no longer having a debate about this, and we're no longer having a debate about investing primarily in transit and not building roads, in part because we have already built a 16-lane highway through our region that the minute it was built was filled with cars. We have an expressway right through the heart of the city that was built in the 1950s, and by 1960 it was at capacity, completely at capacity. So this notion that you can build a region that is sprawling and people can have a high quality of life, we've actually demonstrated that that simply doesn't work.
Okay, we've only got 2 more minutes, Ludo, so if you've got one more burning question, then we'll move on for a well-deserved cup of coffee. Ludo.
Thank you. Just one question. We talk a lot about cities for people, and we do this all the time, and every transport guidance document, every manual says it's all about people, yet we continue to build cities that are not for people. What are your successes and learnings in Toronto around how to shift that paradigm? Because it is a paradigm shift. It's a really quite a fundamental behaviour change. What are the kind of couple of key ingredients?
So the first one I'll say is that one of the challenges, and this is why I talked about precinct planning and delivering on the promise, and I think you're doing that right here. You're delivering on the promise. I think this area is breathtaking. When you deliver on the promise, you start to plant the seed that we can do things differently, that we can live differently. And one of the really critical parts about our growing conversations is that we don't want to put people in camps or put people in corners. The minute you put people in corners, you can't change your mind. You have to defend your position. Yeah, and that is a risk to our urbanism, is putting people in corners. We have to find what our shared interests are, and then build the dialogue around those shared interests. We have a shared interest in a really high quality of life. Does anyone like a really long commute? No one likes a long commute. The myth of the long commute, I like to call it, this idea that you can live really far away, hop on a highway, and crank up the tunes, and it'll be great traveling. You'll have your latte, whatever, your flat white. I'm trying to be culturally appropriate. That myth has been blown out of the water. And so one of the really big things, I had a slide that I took out, which I wish I left in. When we did our transit network plan, we called the planning process feeling congested. And we talked about how we're all feeling congested. Our sidewalks are congested, our transit's congested, our roads are congested. And part of what we did was we consulted with people we wouldn't normally consult with, and we did it in different ways. And I have a newspaper headline, and it's written by a newspaper columnist who writes for our kind of right-wing rag. And the headline says, "I'm seeing the world differently now that I've seen it from a bicycle seat." And the first line of the article is, "I used to hate cyclists." And then the second is, "But all that has changed now that I've seen the world from a bicycle seat." And what I love about this article is that that was the goal of the consultations. The goal was to say, hey, can we think about the city in a different way that is going to serve all of us and be in all of our interests? And if you can figure out a way to have your conversations in such a way that it's not kind of the echo chamber of all the same people talking to each other, then you can begin to implement change because people start going, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is a better city for everyone.
Fabulous.
Hey, look, we've got to
Great.
wrap it up.
Thank
A massive round of applause for Jennifer Keysman and Ludo Campbell-Reid. It's been absolutely inspiring, Jennifer, so thank you so much for that. Ludo as well.
Are you closing?
No, you close?
Am I?
Yeah.
So look, thank you. I just got my list of things I'm meant to do here. Far from me to break from what I'm told to do. Look, before we break, thank you to everybody that came along today to listen to Jennifer. Jennifer, it's really magical having you here. We've got a whole day of Jennifer on Monday. My team, Auckland Transport, we're going to be immersing you in the bureaucracy and the staff. We've got amazing people ready to mine you for information and ideas, and already today has been brilliant. So can I thank you all for coming today? Thank the Auckland Conversations team for putting this on. I'd like to just thank Wallace as well for doing your great job, and also the sponsors for the program, which are up on the board, and I guess thank you to the RMLA, because we have partnered with you once before on this, and it shows you what we can do in bringing amazing people to New Zealand and to Auckland. So thank you to you for the partnership. Last but not least, Boffa who are sort of, in a way, our team's sort of partners in crime in this changing city. And I want to shout out to Rachel and the team, and Stuart and John Potter and the guys who really are our partners. So thank you, everybody. And Jennifer, would everyone give her another round of applause?
So just a bit of housekeeping.